to the today's episode of our podcast. And today we have with us Dr. Anand Karve. He is a botanist. He has worked his whole life on biological problems. So today we are going to talk about his research, where he will be discussing about how we can grow plants without the help of chemical fertilizers. So first of all, thank you, sir, for joining and giving us your time.
You're welcome.
So, first, sir, before going to the actual topic, just give us a little bit about your background, like what you studied and how was your journey as a scientist, and then we'll go to your actual research.
Okay. I studied up to my bachelor's degree in Pune, got my bachelor's from Pune University, and then I went to Germany and joined a university called Tübingen University. It is in southwest Germany, about 40 kilometers north of Stuttgart. And it's a hilly area, very similar to Pune. And it's a small university town, at least at that time it was, but now it has grown quite big. I was there recently. And I was there for 5 years, completed my PhD, spent one more year serving in the university as an research assistant, and then came back to India. In India, I had a UGC Senior Research Fellowship, and it was a scheme run at that time by UGC to attract people who were trained in a foreign country to come back to India. So the scholarship was of the same emolument as that of a lecturer, and it was tax-free. But I wanted to join Pune University, but in Pune University, I was not. I was told accommodation for a person like me. So then I wrote back to UGC and told them that they can place me wherever they want. So I was placed in Chandigarh, in Punjab University. It was recently started, and they were employing a lot of people. So I joined there and started my research work. The topic that I had selected, that means it was approved by UGC, of course, was, if you treated leaves, if you treated a germinating seed with streptomycin, then you get albino plants. That means the chloroplasts are killed, because you may be knowing that the chloroplasts are actually modified bacteria. And by treating a germinating seed with an antibiotic, you can kill the chloroplasts, so that you get, when the seed germinates, you get a plant which has no chlorophyll in it. And I wanted to produce such plants and study their leaf movements. There's a phenomenon called endogenous circadian rhythm. That means if you look at any leguminous plant, you will find that the leaves fold in the evening and in the morning they open again. So this movement is endogenous. That means even if you kept the plant in complete darkness, when outside it is morning, the leaves open. So I wanted to study this phenomenon, find out whether chlorophyll had any role. By creating plants which were completely free of chlorophyll, I wanted to study whether this movement occurs in leaves which have no chlorophyll. But you had to continuously photographs of the leaves, because a person cannot stay there throughout his, the experiment, which can go even for up to a week, and take measurements. So you needed an automatic camera which would photograph the leaves every hour or every 2 hours, every 3 hours, like that. Whatever you set, it will take a photograph after that period. And then you looked at the photographs to see how the leaves are moving. Now, that kind of photograph, that kind of a camera was not available in whole of India at that time. And they said it will have to be imported. What I'm talking about is 1961-62. At that time, there was a foreign exchange crunch, and it was impossible to import anything. Whatever was absolutely necessary was imported, and only for that the Reserve Bank would give you permission. But something which I needed for my research was not considered very important by the Reserve Bank, and that permission was denied to me. So I could not continue my research at all. So I spent about an year in Chandigarh. Then in Maharashtra, two new universities were formed. One was Marathwada University in Aurangabad, and the other one was Kolhapur Shivaji University. So I went to Aurangabad as lecturer, and afterwards, when the Shivaji University posts were advertised, I applied for the Shivaji University post, and I got the appointment. In fact, at the age of 28, I became even the head of department, because at that time I had a lot of publications to my credit, and the type of work that I was doing, like endogenous rhythm and the effect of light and all that, uh, they were not understood by anybody in India. And when I sent the paper for publication to a journal called Indian Society of Plant Physiology, they published a journal. They rejected my paper. So all my papers were published outside India. And that was considered very prestigious, that you get your papers published outside India. And so with that, uh, I immediately got an appointment in Shivaji University as head of botany department. I was serving there when my brother-in-law, who was in Fulton, he had started a seed company called Necker Seeds. My elder daughter had married this gentleman. At that particular time, the government of Maharashtra was against hybrids. They were saying that hybrids and the improved new varieties, they needed so many inputs that they were playthings of the rich farmers, and they were not useful for ordinary rain-fed farmers. So Maharashtra government would not give any help to my brother-in-law, and he faced a lot of problems which needed a scientist to solve them. So he came to me. I was the head of botany department, and he gave this offer. He said that he would give scholarships to my students who would do PhD under my guidance, and they would get their PhD and he would get his problems solved. So with this offer, I took him to the vice chancellor, and the vice chancellor flatly refused. He said, "We are a socialistic society and we cannot accept such an offer from a capitalist. So this will not be allowed." So then my brother-in-law gave me a counter offer. He said that, "Well, you come and join the seed company as the research director." And that was the time when India was very short of food. And that was the beginning of the Green Revolution, and a very exciting period as far as agriculture was concerned. I had no background of agriculture. I was a theoretical botanist, but I took the challenge and joined him. And that was a very exciting period, because all my colleagues in that company, They were agricultural graduate. And I realized that the difference between agriculture and botany is that which is between physics and engineering. In physics, you learn the theory, and in engineering, you learn the practice. That was exactly the difference between botany and agriculture. So I would ask the question, how? And why? And those people were interested only in the how. How do we plow the land? How deep should we plow it? Where should the seed be placed? Where should we put the fertilizer? How much fertilizer is needed per acre? This. And I was always asking the question, why? Why do we need fertilizer? Why do we need plowing? What happens when we irrigate the land, etc.? And so I found that a very challenging field because nobody was there who was thinking like me, and I could give answers to a lot of questions. And I was continuously publishing papers. And when we realized that as a seed company, we had we were looked upon by the government as capitalists. So we started an agricultural research institute, registered it under the Societies Registration Act and the Charity Act and all that. And I became its director. And we started, the seed company was different and this institute was different. And I could then, I was invited to conferences. I got, well, I became a well known scientist. Because people would recognize what our institute was doing and that we were not just capitalists. Then I continued there until 1980 when I got an offer from the United Nations. They had a program in Burma, and I was sent there as an expert on groundnut. And I worked there for 2.5 years. And I did it primarily for the salary. But even while I was there, I conducted research on my own, although United Nations did not expect it from me. And I kept it a secret. And then after my assignment was over, I got a fellowship from Germany and went there and completed the research. And that also became world famous. Uh, so then Hindustan Liver had started a seed company, so they offered me a job as the head of the research section. I accepted it and left this institute and joined Hindustan Liver. But Hindustan Liver had an entirely different type of business, and they could not really uh, strike roots in the seed business, and they could not do much. So I left that job, went back to Phaltan, and I was searching for something else to do. When one Dr. Tilak, who retired as director of National Chemical Laboratory, he had this idea that the CSIR, that is Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, operates 29 research laboratories all over India. And in the course of their research, they are finding a lot of new things which could be useful for rural development. So he started, uh, it was not an institute. In fact, he started it only as a division of an already existing institute in Pune. He called it Center for Application of Science and Technology for Rural Development. And he was not very active. He had already had a heart attack. And so he was in search of a more active youngster. So he offered me a job and I joined that group. So I became the director of this Center for Application of Science and Technology for Rural Development. And while there, I realized that Dr. Tilak did not want to do any research on his own. All he did was he visited all the institutions run by CSIR, spend a week there, would talk to the scientists, find out what was useful for the rural areas, come back with that, and then he would hold a conference for NGOs in Maharashtra and tell them that, look, these are the new things you can make a straw thatch waterproof by using this technology. You can do this to stop evaporation from the lake so that the water would remain there throughout summer. Like that, many things he told them, but the NGOs were not interested at that time. I don't know why. They would come there, they would, uh, attend the conference and go back. And absolutely nothing happened. Because I was in the seed company, I had a good background and knew exactly what the rural people wanted. I had several ideas in my head as to how to solve problems. And then I started working on that, and the Department of Science and Technology of central government, they funded our projects, and we really took off from there. And it was until 2011. I just don't even remember how fast the time passed. So I was all the time doing new things, all the time attending conferences, all the time giving talks. People used to come and visit me. Even foreigners used to come to us to work with us as trainees, and it was wonderful time. By that time, the Department of Science and Technology told me that we will have to register our own institute as a charitable institute. Without that, they would not be able to give us any funding. So I registered a separate entity called Appropriate Rural Technology Institute. The acronym was ARTI or ARTI. And that was registered in Phaltan because I had spent 20 years in Phaltan. I had good contacts. We could buy some land. We got a for the building also. So Phaltan is now the headquarters of this institute. In 2011, when I became 75-year-old, the Department of Science and Technology told me that according to their rules, I will have to leave this institute because with an old man at the head, their rules will not allow them to fund this institute. So since 2011, I am out of Arti. I know all those people. I still communicate with them. They do small jobs for me, but I am in no way connected with it. So nowadays, I'm working in an institute called Deccan Sugar Technologists Association. It has its headquarters in Pune. And recently they built a big institute, big building, 6-story big building with a very good modern laboratory and all that. I have been a life member of the institute since 1970. So when I approached, I said I would like to use their laboratory to do my own research. If your research has to do with sugar or sugar cane or any crop that would give, that means even sugar beet would do, then I don't have to spend my own money. They would fund fund the research. So since then, I'm working in that laboratory, and what I'm going to tell you today was almost completely done in that laboratory.
So, so your experience is like vast. Like for me, it's very difficult even to like fathom, because you were talking about 1960s and 70s. I'm like 95 born. So for me, it's even difficult to even imagine like from where you have started working. So like there are so many questions that are popping in my head right now. So first one that I want to ask is, like, you talked about working as a researcher in an university, and then working as a scientist in a company, right? So what do you like, as a researcher in a university or as a company employee working on something practical?
Well, research in a university gives you a lot of leeway because there's nobody to tell you what you work on. Whereas when you are working in a company, especially that experience I had when I was working for Hindustan Lever Limited, that they had very specific objectives and they wanted me to work only on them. If even side by side I was doing something else, they would object to that. They said, if you have extra time, then you do more work, but for us, you don't do anything for yourself. That is the big difference. Because in Phaltan also, I was head of the research institute called Nimkar Agricultural Research Institute, and I could do whatever I wanted.
So as a scientist, you like your inner scientist prefer the research part as of
Yes,
to.
the academic institutions have much greater freedom than the commercial institutions.
So, so you were talking about the Green Revolution. So just a couple of months back, so Punjab elections happened, right? So one of the biggest issue in that election was that the degradation of soil that has happened because of the excessive use of chemical fertilizers that Punjab did during the Green Revolution. So we all say that Green Revolution was a very big thing for us, because we reduced the food scarcity in our country. But Punjab paid a very big price for that green revolution because of the excessive use of chemical fertilizers. So can you just talk a little bit about that, about green revolution?
Well, actually, chemical fertilizers are not bad because in botany, we are taught that the plants are unable to take the naturally occurring minerals from the soil. They can take only things which are water soluble. Once something dissolves in water, then only the roots can take it up. And the minerals in the soil are not soluble in water. In fact, whatever is soluble has already been washed away to the sea by rain. So, this was the main difficulty which the farmers were facing, that they could not, give enough food to their plants. Now, in almost 1,000 years, almost 100 years ago, in 1914, Germans developed a process called Haber's process. And in that Haber's process, nitrogen gas and hydrogen gas could be combined to produce ammonia. And this process is used even today. And it requires 300 atmosphere pressure and 400 degrees centigrade temperature. So it's an extremely energy intensive process. And because the chemical fertilizers are required by every farmer in the world, and because they are applied again and again every year, this particular energy, this particular industry uses more energy than any other industry in the world. It uses even more energy than the steel industry. So, uh, this ammonia is a stable chemical, and you can then change it into nitrate, you can convert it into urea. So, all nitrogenous fertilizers can be formed from ammonia. So ammonia is the basic nitrogenous molecule which is formed by this Haber's process. And this was developed in Germany, and now it's known all over the world. Even in India, we use it. And we produce first the ammonia, and then from that we make ammonium sulfate, ammonium phosphate, and or even nitrate can be done by oxidizing ammonia and all that. So you have in the chemical fertilizers a form of elements that the plants need. In fact, this work to find out what the plants actually need was also done in Germany by a scientist called Justus von Liebig. And Liebig showed in 1830 by feeding plants with chemicals, he showed which elements are required by plants, and he showed that out of the whole periodic table, the plants need only about 20. And if you give these 20 chemicals in a water soluble form, then plants thrive. And that was the beginning of the chemical fertilizers. And because of the Haber's process, it became very easy to mass produce chemicals, fertilizers in the factory. Now, what happens is among these 20 chemicals, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potash, these three are called major elements. They are required in huge quantities. All the others like iron, zinc, cobalt, molybdenum, nickel, etc., they are called micro elements because they are required in the very small quantities. So when you buy chemical fertilizers, you are buying N, P, and K. All the micro elements are in the soil and they become available to plants. Very few cases are there where you have to really feed the plants with sulfur containing compounds or iron containing compounds because they are required in very small quantities and they are present in the soil. Now, when I started looking at this thing, I realized that you find green and healthy plants all over the world in growing in nature. And now our science, botany says that the natural minerals are not available to plants. How is it that the plants get their minerals when they are growing in nature? And nobody could tell me that. The standard answer was because two things were known to her, that the more bacteria or more microorganisms there were in the soil, the more fertile was the soil. But nobody could tell why. The accepted explanation was that when you have so many bacteria in the soil, the bacteria don't do any photosynthesis, which means that soil must have a lot of organic material which the bacteria eat to sustain themselves. And when they take, because they don't do photosynthesis, they are in need of carbon. So they take the carbon from the organic matter and the minerals remain in the soil for the plants to be taken away. So that is how when you have a large number of bacteria in the soil, you automatically have a highly fertile soil. Now, I refuted that by showing in 2011 that you can give sugar, ordinary sugar, to the soil and the bacteria multiply. That means the bacteria can take up minerals from the soil. The plants cannot take up, but the bacteria can take up minerals from the soil even when the minerals are not soluble. And secondly, I said that, because I was feeding the soil with pure sugar, Sugar has no minerals, and still the bacteria were multiplying, which means the bacteria obviously were taking the minerals from the soil. So here I established for the first time a connection between the soil minerals and bacteria, that the bacteria survive by taking minerals from the soil. Until that time, nobody had accepted this. They were saying that the bacteria cannot do photosynthesis, so they need carbon. And that if you provide them with carbon, they multiply. But when you actually, I Googled it, I did not actually analyze the bacteria, and Google search showed me that bacteria have, on an average, about 12% nitrogen, about 3%, uh, uh, no, 2% phosphorus, and 1% potassium. So these are relatively high quantities. They are not available. The total mineral content of a bacterial cell together with nitrogen is about 15%, whereas a plant body will have only 5% minerals in it. So even by feeding on plants, the bacteria do not get enough minerals. They have to get the minerals from the soil. So then, when I said that, look, soil has all the minerals, bacteria, in order to multiply, need carbon. Their minerals they can take independently from the soil. And the more bacteria there are in the soil, the better is the soil fertility. That means the bacteria must be giving the minerals to the plants. But there is no philanthropy in nature. Nobody gives something free of cost to another organism. The other organism has to fight for it. So my argument was that the plants must be killing the microorganisms and feeding on them. I was helped by when I found a paper which stated that the root exudates of all plants contain antibiotics. So if you put a seed for germination, uh, you may have studied or known how penicillin was discovered. This Alexander, he left some petri dishes with a bacterial culture growing on it and went for holidays. And when he came back, he found that in one petri dish, there was a fungus growing, and around that fungus, no bacterium survived. It was a blank space, and there was a zone of inhibition, and the bacteria were growing only beyond that zone. I could show by with a germinating seed exactly the same thing, that if you take a petri dish, inoculate it with bacteria, and put a seed on it, the germinating seed kills the bacteria around it. Now, in fungi, our textbooks say the fungi kill the bacteria and eat them. That is how they survive. I said, why not have the same argument for plants? The plants eat the bacteria and get their food from them. But the thing is that the bacteria also do photosynthesis. So they do not need the carbon from the bacteria, but they are feeding the bacteria in order to get the nitrogen and the minerals, which they cannot take from the soil. So there was another paper from Finland which stated that there are digestive enzymes in the root exudates. Now, the roots are all the time exuding something that is called root exudates. And these root exudates have antibacterial properties. Now, when Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin, a lot of research work was done all over the world to find out plant-based antibiotics, and everybody found that the roots have antibiotics. In fact, this was the reason why in Ayurveda, 60% of our drugs are based on roots. Our Ayurvedacharyas discovered that roots could kill bacteria. In fact, they didn't even know anything about bacteria. They found that roots could cure diseases. But now we know that the diseases are caused by bacteria, and the roots produce antibiotics and they kill the bacteria.
Okay, so like, so did
Now,
you publish a paper on this, or like what is the status of this research now?
well, I have not yet published anything. I have given lectures at various conferences, and those conference proceedings contain this. So I can quote the page number and the year of appearance, year of publication, and all that. But it is not a regular journal in which I have published, because I still lack the final proof. So I have collected a lot of data. I'm myself convinced, and if I talk to somebody, he also can be convinced. But I need a little bit more research before I can publish it. Now, one thing which supported my viewpoint was a a new technology which the Germans had developed in 1990. You know, there are very small uh, settlements of, say, uh, five residences or 10 houses. They are so small that they cannot afford to treat their sewage. I mean, because the sewage contains matter, feces, it is not allowed under the European Union rules to go directly into any stream or river. They have, and then once it has been purified to the recommended purity, then only it can be let into a river. Now, these settlements were small, so they could not afford to do this treatment. So, what the Germans did, 400 such villages, which went zigzag, total surface. And in this canal, both the sides, they planted trees, and the roots went into the water. And to the canal, and when it came out, they found that water that was coming out was sufficiently pure to be let into a river. So this was called the root zone technology. Now, this was developed by NERI, that is National Environmental Engineering Research Institute in Nagpur, and they are now selling it. They have patented. It's just beds of raised beds with plants established on them, and water flows through the roots. The roots are hanging in the water, and when the water comes out, it is pure. So this is called root zone technology, and they have published a lot of papers on this, and I took data from them, and I found that 97% of the bacteria are killed and consumed by these plants. So this was a direct proof of what I have been saying, that the plants kill and consume bacteria.
So you are basically at a correlation and causation period, like this is happening and this is also happening, so there must be a relation between those two.
Pardon, I just talk loudly.
Yeah, so basically you are just in the that correlation is equal to causation time in science, right? Like this is happening and this is also happening at the same time, which means
Yes.
probably like
Now, uh, the real proof was produced by the lady who is in charge of the Deccan Sugar Technologists Association's research laboratory. She's Archana Yevle, and she took 10 soil samples, found out the bacterial population density in those soils first, so many bacteria per gram. Then she planted plants. She grew plants in those soils. And after 40 days of plant growth, she took again soil samples and found out the population density. And on an average, in these 10 soil samples, we found that 75% less bacteria were there. So initially we had 100 bacteria. After 40 days, only 25 were left. So this itself showed, and no fertilizer was applied, nothing, and the plants had grown very well. So this showed that the plants had killed and eaten the bacteria.
so. My next question is: let's say this is true. Okay, let's say this is true. So, what impact it can have in future agriculture thing? Like, what is the benefit? Like, what is a practical
Uh,
thing we can make? Uh,
there are two aspects to it. What has happened is, at present, all the plant varieties that are given to farmers are first tested. Now, this test takes place in plots which have received chemical fertilizers at the recommended rates. That means, supposing it's wheat, you give 100 kg per hectare nitrogen, 50 kg per hectare P2O5, and 50 kg per hectare K2O. This is given. Then you test various varieties and find out which variety is giving you the highest yields, and this is given to the farmers. That's how you develop new varieties. That means you are automatically selecting for varieties which are responding to chemical fertilizers. So, what farmers today are growing are varieties which give high yield when you give chemical fertilizers to the field. What I'm suggesting is that now that we know how the plants in nature feed themselves, we should develop varieties which would respond to high population densities of uh, bacteria in the soil. So, first of all, we will have to change our breeding techniques and breed varieties which will respond to being fed with bacteria rather than with chemical fertilizers. Secondly, we will have to develop techniques of bacteria on such a large scale that we can provide bacteria to farmers that stop, don't use chemical fertilizers. We give you this bacteria, you put these into the soil. And this is what I'm now working on in Deccan Sugar Technologists Association's laboratory. And we found that there need not be soil bacteria at all. They can be any bacteria because, after all, the roots produce antibiotics which kill bacteria. So, what we did there was we grew lactic bacteria. These are the bacteria which make curds and buttermilk. These bacteria are very easy to culture because they produce lactic acid, they acidify the medium, and because of the acidic medium, only the lactic bacteria survive and all other bacteria are killed. So, when you have reached a pH of 4, you are sure that your culture has only lactic bacteria and no other bacteria. And this culture we gave to the plants, and we found that the plants grew beautifully. You could feed the plants with lactic bacteria. So now we are trying to develop farm-based technologies which the farmer himself can operate and produce his own bacteria. Now, I told you that I had shown you that by feeding soil with sugar, you could multiply the bacteria in the soil. The same thing you can do with anything else. You can feed it even with green leaves. In fact, that is what the farmers are doing today. They plant something in the field, plow it in. That is called green manuring. And after that green matter has decomposed, then they grow a crop on it. This is called green manuring. But I showed that you can totally substitute green manuring by applying sugar to the soil. And again, I said, what happens when a fruit falls on the ground? First, the pulp decomposes, then the pulp goes into the soil. So the soil bacteria multiply, seed germinates, so that the newly germinating seed uh, has enough bacteria in the soil to feed on. That is a natural process. That so what I'm trying to do is that I'm studying nature to find out what processes the nature is using and how we can use them. So, as I said, we know how to multiply bacteria now. So we can have a highly multiplied culture of bacteria and apply it to the soil. That means instead of chemical fertilizers, you are giving a biological fertilizer. And the plants are happy. They are getting food. They are getting their nitrogen. They are getting their minerals. They don't mind which bacteria are feeding them because the bacteria change from soil to soil. If you have black cotton soil, as in Maharashtra, then because of its high pH, the iron in our soils is not available to plants. It is in a trivalent form, Fe3, whereas plants can absorb only Fe2. But there are bacteria in our soil, black soil, which can convert the trivalent iron into divalent, start using that iron, and the plants kill these bacteria and take them in their bodies. Or you have bacteria which thrive even in nitrogen free conditions because these bacteria fix atmospheric nitrogen themselves. So if you have soils which are very poor in nitrogen, they will have bacteria which fix nitrogen, and those bacteria will be killed and eaten by the plants. Or if you have red lateritic soils as in Konkan, then those soils are very rich in phosphorus. So the bacteria in those soils are called phosphorus solubilizing bacteria. They produce certain acids which solubilize the non-soluble phosphorus compounds in the soil, make them soluble, take them up, and then the plants kill these bacteria and take the phosphorus from them. So it is immaterial which bacteria are there. As long as the soil is rich in bacteria, you can have good plant growth. And this is what I realized. You must have heard about the desert locusts. These are locusts, toad.
Yeah.
They attack plants. So they always search for cultivated areas. But they come from the deserts because their eggs are laid in the desert. There they hatch, the the locusts multiply, they emerge, and then they fly towards cultivated areas. Why don't the locusts lay their eggs in the cultivated field themselves? Because they are afraid that their larvae will be killed and eaten by the plants. Because the plants have insecticides also. They not only have bactericides, but the modern plants, they are insectivorous. They have they can kill nematodes, they can kill amoebae, and they can kill bacteria. So the plants, you can tell this to a Jain whatever vegetables he's eaten, they are actually non-veg.
So my next question would be that so I was reading a bit about that green revolution thing. So people said that because we our population is growing so much around the world, not just in our country, and in order to feed this big population, we needed more and more food, and that's why we started using the chemical fertilizers, because chemical fertilizers can just multiply the crop, so the yield is so much. So if tomorrow, let's say, we ditch the chemical fertilizers and start using these organic fertilizers that you're talking about, so we'll be able to feed the entire population of this planet with this organic fertilizer.
Yes, only thing is you will have to breed varieties which utilize the bacteria better than the fertilizers, chemical fertilizers. So, as I said, the varieties that you have today, they have been bred to do well with chemical fertilizers. But we need varieties which will do without chemical fertilizers, but which we can feed with bacteria. Even today's varieties, we have shown by feeding them with extra bacteria, you can get higher yield. But we cannot match the yield that they get with fertilizers.
Yeah, so basically we are going the other way around.
Yes, we have to change the strategies because of the exigencies, because this is a, today for making ammonia, you are using fossil fuels because that much energy is just not available. Solar energy is too diffused. So you need concentrated energy, and that is available only in the case of fossil fuels. But if you grew, say, there is a group of bacteria which are called blue-green algae. Because they are green, people thought they are algae, but they are actually bacteria. And these are the bacteria which they got converted into the chloroplasts. They started living in the leaves and transformed themselves into chloroplasts. And that is why I told you right at the beginning that by using streptomycin on a germinating seed, you can kill the chloroplasts and you can produce albino plants. That is the reason that the chloroplasts are actually bacteria. So we have found in preliminary trials that you can extract these bacteria from the leaves and use those also as fertilizers. That is also possible. In fact, there is one company in Baroda, I saw this Google, that is actually selling leaf proteins as fertilizers.
So it will be very economical for our country's farmers as well, right? Considering their economical situation, instead of using chemical fertilizers, using this organic fertilizer can help them economically, right?
Uh, yes, what had happened until now, until very recently, for instance, is that we needed food. Now we are surplus in food. The only food item that we import today is edible oil. So the urgency is not there to increase the yield per acre. And our Prime Minister is saying that he wants to double the income of the farmers. Now, doubling the income means you have to increase their profit. And you can increase the profit both by increasing the income or by reducing the expenditure. And if I succeed in developing a farm-based technology which will show the farmers how to grow their own bacteria, and they start feeding these bacteria through drip irrigation or through ordinary irrigation to the plants, they don't need to buy fertilizer. They can produce their bacteria and give them. So their big expenditure of chemical fertilizers is reduced. So even if they do not get the maximum yield that they were getting with chemical fertilizers, the profitability will increase.
So my next question is a little bit different than the scientific research questions. The question is that nowadays we see many people do Bachelor of Science in chemistry, math, biology, and physics, these basic sciences, right? But most of the people just end their studies there, and either they do government jobs and all these kind of things. So most of the people are not going to the research part. So my question was that what are we doing wrong in our education system that we are not able to generate passion in students for scientific research? Like, can we do anything different than what we're doing right now?
Uh, well, what we need is a lot of fundamental research, because without fundamental research, you cannot go to applied research. Now, these technologies like agriculture, engineering, etc., they are all applied, and you can, there's a limit as to how far you can go in applied research. For instance, you can develop a highly efficient internal combustion engine, but it will still be an internal combustion engine which will be using fossil fuels. So you have to think out of the box, and somebody had done that, and that's why now we have got electric vehicles, or you can directly produce hydrogen from water and use that hydrogen as fuel. So something like that. So some out of box thinking is required, and that uh, what happens is I still remember the words of my botany professor in Germany. He was the director of that institute, and he was taking the fundamental botany lecture of the beginners. So, right on the first day, he came to the class, wrote names of 10 books on the blackboard, and said, all these 10 books are good. He is not recommending any one. He said, you can buy any of them, or you can buy all of them, and you can study botany. But don't miss my lecture, because I will be teaching you something that is not in any of these books. And that is the somehow uh, in the Western countries, or maybe because I have experience only of Germany, but at least in Germany, that is how they teach. That means they teach things to their students which are totally new, that are not from the textbook. For instance, I can give you one example. There was a German lady who was appointed as head of department of zoology in Pune University when Pune University started zoology department. She was German, and most probably she did just that. She told the students, you buy these textbooks and learn for yourself. And she started teaching them things which were not in the textbooks. And the students complained to the vice chancellor saying that our professor is teaching out of syllabus. And so she had to resign and leave the job, because they said whatever she is teaching is of no use to us. It's not in the syllabus.
So we need to change the fundamentals of education system in our country, however.
Yes.
So this was a very nice session that I had. Well, thank you, sir, for giving your time. And I would like to have another episode on the another topic that you sent me yesterday on WhatsApp.
Sure.
And I hope my channel will grow enough that next time I would be doing this episode in person.
Okay.
Thanks for giving the time, sir.
You're welcome.
Hi. So first of all, thanks for watching the video. And आपने यहाँ तक वीडियो देखा है, which means कि आपको वीडियो अच्छा लगा होगा. एंड हमारे ये पॉडकास्ट चालू करने का एक्चुअल रीज़न यही है कि हमारे कंट्री के सामने आजकल जितने भी प्रॉब्लम्स हैं, साइंस से रिलेटेड, टेक्नोलॉजी से रिलेटेड, बिजनेस, पॉलिटिक्स, एनवायरनमेंट, इन सारी चीज़ों से रिलेटेड जितने भी प्रॉब्लम्स है उनका डिस्कशन न्यूज़ चैनल्स पे हो रहा है, जहाँ पे मतलब हर कोई एक दूसरे के ऊपर चिल्ला रहा है और लाइक आपको अपना ओपिनियन 10 सेकेंड में रखना होता है। और जितने कॉम्प्लेक्स ये प्रॉब्लम्स हैं वो ऑलमोस्ट इम्पॉसिबल है कि आप इन इतने कॉम्प्लेक्स प्रॉब्लम्स को 10 सेकेंड में एक्सप्लेन कर सको। सो हम लोग ये एक प्लेटफॉर्म बनाना चाहते हैं जहाँ पे इन सारे प्रॉब्लम से रिलेटेड जो सब्जेक्ट एक्सपर्ट्स हैं वो अपना नॉलेज शेयर कर सकें, और उनको हम लोग एक प्रॉपर टाइम देना चाहते हैं ताकि उनकी एक्सपर्टीज़ वो अच्छे से प्रॉपरली एक्सप्लेन कर सकें उन प्रॉब्लम्स के ऊपर। सो ये बेसिकली एक एजुकेशनल प्लेटफॉर्म है जो हम लोग बना रहे हैं। तो अगर आप भी इस प्लेटफॉर्म का पार्ट बनना चाहते हो तो सब्सक्राइब टू आवर चैनल, बिकॉज हमारे लिए एक एक सब्सक्रिप्शन इंपॉर्टेंट है। बिकॉज जितने ज़्यादा सब्सक्रिप्शन हमारे पास होंगे उतने अच्छे गेस्ट हम लोग ला पाएंगे हमारे प्लेटफॉर्म के ऊपर। सो आई होप यू सब्सक्राइब द चैनल and help us build our community. So again, thanks for watching the video, and we'll meet you in our next video with one another new guest. So again, thanks and goodbye.